Apple loves introducing features that people fall in love with, like the touch bar, or the butterfly keyboard, or 3D touch. And then once we get really attached to it and we'd really start to truly appreciate all of its great features and beauty, they love to just completely destroy it and massacre it and rip it away from us and tear our hearts out and light them on fire and bury them in a cold ice bucket. And it sounds like the next thing Apple might be tearing out of our chests is the iMac Pro, because in all of these Bloomberg reports for things we should expect in 2021, I am noticing a very absent reference of the iMac Pro. Let's begin. Alright, if you recall at all, if any of you watched my videos in the past, we have talked about rumors alluding to an iMac Pro refresh of some sorts, but they have never really formulated into anything. But ever since the iMac Pro was unveiled, Apple has almost done nothing with it, okay? There was occasional site refresh where they added one extra GPU option or added one extra bit of RAM option, and then at one site refresh they actually ditched the 8-core iMac Pro, which is the one I'm using, so now the base model is the 10 core. That means I have a limited edition iMac Pro. They don't even make this one anymore because it sucks, but they don't make it anymore. But outside of that, no design changes of any kind, no spec bumps. It didn't even get the nano textured glass that the 5K iMac got. So that has a lot of people thinking that whenever Apple inevitably refreshes the iMac this year with the to die for design language of the iPad Pro on a stick, that's gonna be the time they just decide there doesn't need to be an iMac Pro anymore. It's just gonna be redundant, and I would say there's a decent chance that these iMac refreshes are going to be a bit more pricey than the current existing iMacs because of that updated design. And Apple Silicon, yeah, will save Apple some money, but they're just going to eat that up with the thinner bezels. So I think we'd be lucky if the iMacs that are coming out this year end up starting at the same prices as the current iMacs, but you should probably expect them to be priced a little bit higher, which means that when you start speccing them out, they'll probably go north of $5,000 or somewhere around there. And then the iMac Pro just simply won't need to exist anymore, because these entry-level iMacs will just completely take over any use case, and they're probably going to vastly outperform whatever the iMac Pro is capable of. So why do you need an iMac Pro anymore, right? You know, just have the regular iMac line, and iMac Pro can be that nice little stopgap that was there to hold people over until the modular Mac Pro came out, except there were all these people saying not to get the iMac Pro because the Mac Pro was coming later and you should wait for that one, only to now find out that if you bought that Intel Mac Pro, it was going to become outdated in like 1 to 2 years once the Apple Silicon transition took place. Whereas the iMac Pro, I don't know, at least it got a good, 3-4 years of being useful before it starts becoming obsolete and outperformed by Apple Silicon. So at the end of the day, I'm very grateful I went with the iMac Pro instead of waiting for the cheese grater Mac Pro that starts at $6,000 and goes up to $50,000. Instead, just a nice little 5K iMac that is a 5K resolution, great specs, aged very gracefully. I'm still editing all of my videos for the Tailosive network on it. It served me well. I want to upgrade later this year, but it's doing fine so far, and if I really needed to push it a few more years, I probably could. But does an iMac Pro really need to exist in the lineup? That's perhaps the question we should be asking, because it's not like these upcoming redesigned iMacs are going to be objectively worse than the iMac Pro, unless your rate of judging a Mac comes down to the color. It's like, these new iMacs are not space gray, therefore they suck. Some people are like that, not everyone, but I've met a few people like that, so I guess in that caliber they might end up sucking, but I'm sure the new iMacs are going to have decent webcams, just as good as the iMac Pros, probably great speaker systems, decent microphones, and of course Apple Silicon is going to be miles better. The only thing I could see maybe being a bit worse than the iMac Pro is the I/O, because this has one of the best I/Os of any recent Mac released in the past 5 years. You got 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, 4 USB-A's, SD card slot, Ethernet, and headphone jack. Kind of hard to find a Mac that can do that these days. This is pretty much the only one that has all that. So these newer iMacs, I could see them ditching some of that. Hopefully they still have 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, but I could see them not going with 4 USB-A's, or maybe ditching the SD card slot, but it sounds like MacBooks are bringing those back anyway, so probably keep that. Either way, what purpose could an iMac Pro serve in this Apple Silicon world? Well, the rumors we heard last year was that perhaps Apple was planning a Pro Display XDR with computer parts built into it. So instead of spending $6,000 on a stupid monitor. Instead, you can spend $10,000 on something that has the same display panel as the Pro Display XDR, but now has Apple Silicon and an actual functioning machine on the inside, and you can treat it as an all-in-one. And maybe that would be, you know, the Pro class iMac, because it has extreme dynamic range now, whereas these rumored iMac refreshes are rumored to not really have any groundbreaking display tech, probably just LCDs, similar to the iPad Pro. You know, it's a good display, but it's not going to be mini LED or OLED or anything crazy like that. So perhaps the iMac Pro could come back in an XDR type format, but honestly, because of the niche audience of the Pro Display XDR and the number of people who buy $6,000 monitors are pretty thin, I also imagine the people who would buy a $6,000 reference monitor that also want a computer to be built into it and are willing to pay for something that has both. I bet that's a very, very narrow niche, and I could totally see Apple not wanting to pursue it any further. So yeah, don't get me wrong, it would be interesting for them to try to build a computer into the already pretty thick, you know, pretty chunk Pro Display XDR with all those holes on the back. If they built it with all that same display tech as the Pro Display, and then we're like, okay, now let's stuff a computer in there also, it would be quite an interesting contraption. But yeah, I could see a lot of people skipping out on that, especially if it was going to be, you know, a $10,000 all-in-one design that I'm sure was not going to be upgradable in any form. But that's something I think we're just going to have to get used to with Apple Silicon in general. But perhaps there could be a little bit of a rebranding. Something I've seen suggested a few times is that instead of having just iMacs that come in two sizes, because then we have to keep referencing 21.5-inch iMac and 27-inch iMac, we could just have iMac be the small one and then iMac Pro be the big one. Because, you know, Apple and their marketing strategy is like, if we slap Pro on something, I think people will be more inclined to buy it. Case in point, iPhone 12 Pro. Nobody knows why it's better than the 12. They just all think they should get it because it says Pro. So if they release an iMac and it has, you know, M1X chip, decent specs, decent I/O, it's just a little bit smaller, maybe around the 24-inch screen size, then it's like, okay, that's your regular iMac. You know, it's good enough. It's the basics. If you need a desktop for home and you don't really care too much about the performance, you could just get an iMac. And then Apple's marketing strategy, of course, will be like, or if you're not a complete idiot, you will buy the iMac Pro. And that will have like the M2T chip or something really fancy, and that's going to have more powerful speakers, and it's going to have like 8 more GPU cores than the regular iMac, and the website will be in all black because that's more epic, I guess, whereas if the website's in all white, it just makes it look more clean and simple and minimal. And Apple will have all kinds of vague references on their website like Pro for the Pro, and basically be doing everything they can to be like, yeah, but you really want a 32-inch iMac. That's where you should be going. So maybe the iMac Pro branding can live on in just the larger sized iMac, but probably not likely to happen. I mean, Apple doesn't really do that with MacBooks. We still have MacBook Pros in 2 sizes. We have iPhone 12 Pros in 2 sizes. iPad Pros come in 2 sizes. So the idea of just Pro being the differentiating size factor, probably not going to happen. But I don't know. It'll be an interesting chapter in Apple's history if the iMac Pro ends up getting discontinued and just nothing comes along to replace it. So I'm curious what you guys think. Do you believe the iMac Pro branding should stick around or make its way onto a new product category? Or do you think that we should just be like, hey, let's be grateful there's less syllables, all right? So ditch the word Pro because that's everywhere these days. So let's make sure we can avoid it before Apple starts releasing things like HomePod Pro, and just be grateful that this year we're just going to have iMacs and that's it. Everything that says Pro can either be in a MacBook or a Mac Pro. Feel free to keep me posted because this subject does keep me up at night. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you guys in the next one.